Hi and welcome to this tutorial about hand-sewn buttonholes. This might turn out to be a pretty detailed video, but if you're ready to learn everything from choosing the right thread to mastering different buttonhole styles, you're in the right place. And if you're new here, hi, I'm Christina, I'm a fashion design student and I do sewing and fashion videos. Little disclaimer. During my apprenticeship, I discovered that everyone develops their own method for hand-sewn buttonholes, so if you prefer a different technique, that's perfectly fine. This is how I've been doing it for the past few years, and I hope this video helps you master the process. Types of buttonholes. There are a few common buttonhole shapes, for example, square, rounded, and keyhole. Each serves a different purpose. Square buttonholes are typically used for blouses, shirts, or other light to medium weight fabrics. Rounded and keyhole buttonholes are more common in outerwear like blazers, jackets, and trench coats. I'll walk you through each of these in a step-by-step tutorial later on, but before we get into that, let's talk about something just as important, the thread. If you'd like to skip this part, check the timestamps to jump ahead to the tutorials. Thread and why it matters. Choosing the right thread is crucial, and here's why. Threads come in various materials and thicknesses, and it's essential to match the thread to your fabric. I'll give you some recommendations at the end of the video, but first let's break down what all those thread numbers mean. You'll often see numbers like number 30, NM, 100 or something similar. While there's no universal standard for thread labeling, a good rule of thumb is the higher the number, the finer the thread. Common thread types. Number 100 thread, like this blue Gütermann one, is one of the most commonly used for sewing garments. This specific one is made of cotton, but I usually prefer polyester for its durability, especially when using industrial sewing machines, as it doesn't break as easily. Number 120 thread is often used for overlocking, but for thinner fabrics it can also be great for regular sewing. Number 30 thread is much thicker and perfect for buttonholes, especially on heavier fabrics like jackets or blazers. I often use Gütermann or Ammann thread in this size for hand-sewn buttonholes. There are also other options. If you're working with medium weight fabrics, number 50 is a good option. For special cases, you might also come across silk buttonhole threads, usually around number 40. They're shiny and slippery, making them suitable for fabrics like satin. Some of my classmates during my apprenticeship swore by silk threads, but I personally avoid them unless I'm working with similar shiny materials, as they can be tricky to handle. Tools and materials. Before we start sewing, here's a quick list of what you'll need regardless of the buttonhole type. First we have interfacing, buttonhole thread of your choice, a button, hand gauge, I hope that's how it's pronounced, or something to measure, vanishing chalk or fabric marker, small sharp scissors. I prefer tailor's stitch scissors over a seam ripper for opening buttonholes, fabric scissors, punch plier, a long needle, that's my preference, threading tip. Here's a little hack for threading thicker threads through your needle. Use a thin thread to make a loop, pull it through the needle, then slip the thicker thread through the loop and pull the thin thread. This will pull the thicker thread right through the eye of the needle. I hope you understood. Preparing the fabric. For this demonstration, I'm using a medium weight cotton fabric. No matter which buttonhole style you're doing, always use interfacing on the back side of the fabric where the buttonhole will be. And if you're like me, make sure your dog is supervising to keep you on track. Take your button, measure its diameter and thickness, then add 3 mm to get the length of your buttonhole. I inserted a formula right here so you can take a screenshot. Mark the position for your button, then mark the start and end points of the buttonhole. I'll do this 7 times to demonstrate different types of buttonholes. Machine prep. Now let's head to the sewing machine before we start with the tutorials. Set your machine to a small stitch length. I usually go for 1.0 to 1.5. Sew a rectangle around the lines you've marked. And here's a tip: you can also count the stitches. For example, in this case I used 16 stitches in length and 2 stitches in width. Press it with an iron and you're ready to move on to the different buttonhole types. Let's begin with the classic square buttonhole using number 30 thread. First, I'm using fabric scissors to cut an opening in the rectangle. Try to cut as close to the sewn lines as possible without cutting through them. Next, I thread my number 30 yarn using a length double the size of my forearm. This should be just enough to hand sew one buttonhole without needing to re-thread. Once threaded, make a knot at the end. Insert the needle between the 2 layers of fabric, come out at one corner of the rectangle. Guide the thread lengthwise to the opposite corner. Insert the needle through the layers, coming out at the next corner. Guide the thread again lengthwise to the opposite corner. Insert the needle through the layers and coming out again at the original corner. Repeat this step for all buttonholes as a base, ensuring the needle only goes between the fabric layers and does not pass through both layers. In German we call this Vorpass. Starting the buttonhole stitch. Since I'm left-handed, I'll start with my left hand. If you're right-handed, I'll demonstrate that technique later. Just look for the timestamp. Insert the needle through the opening of the buttonhole, coming out just beside the last stitch. Keep a close distance between each stitch for a consistent look. As you pull the thread, you'll see a loop form. To complete the stitch, decide which way you'll thread around the loop, either left or right, and insert the needle through the loop in that direction, then pull the thread through. It's crucial that you always go behind the loop, either left or right, and stay consistent with that, so the stitches look clean at the end. Repeat this buttonhole stitch, adjust the tension each time, be careful not to pull too tight. Continue the stitch pattern, keep stitching around the buttonhole opening, inserting the needle just beside each previous stitch. Adjust your placement to account for any fabric pull. If you notice the fabric moving towards the opening, place the needle slightly behind the last stitch. This ensures that the fabric aligns evenly along the buttonhole edge. And once again, I'm inserting the needle through the opening of the buttonhole and place the next stitch just beside the last stitch I made. I pull until a loop forms, and I'll make sure to go behind the loop, insert the needle through the loop and pull. That's how you do it with the left hand. Now I can also show you how to do it with the right hand. I am not that good in doing it with my right hand, but I thought it's so important to see it at least, how it's done with the right hand. It's basically the same. You stitch next to the stitch you made before. You form a loop and you need to go either left or right around the loop. That's very important. Then insert the needle through the loop and pull. One benefit of doing it with the right hand is that you don't need to stitch upside down, because when you're doing it left-handed, you're always having the upper part of the buttonhole facing downwards. But now you can begin at the bottom left corner of the buttonhole and just stitch around it. But for now I switched to my left hand again, but you can see the whole process of this buttonhole done with the right hand later on in the video. We keep doing this buttonhole stitch until we reach the corner. When you reach the corner, reinforce the area by stitching a few times back and forth. I do that around 3 to 4 times. I think even 2 is enough. Insert the needle in one corner, come out at the opposite corner, stitch back and repeat. This will secure the corner area. If you're running low on thread and you need to end it, push the needle through the stitches on the back side of the fabric twice to secure it. Then insert the needle between the fabric layers, bring it out around 2 centimeters away, pull tightly and cut the thread so it sits hidden between the layers. If you need more thread to complete the buttonhole, start again at the corner where you left off. Follow the same steps as before, keeping the opening toward your dominant hand for consistency. This orientation helps maintain the rhythm and prevents accidentally reversing the thread direction in the loop. So we keep on doing this buttonhole stitch until we reach the last corner. When you reach the last corner, reinforce it again by stitching back and forth 3 to 4 times. Once the buttonhole is complete, secure the thread on the back side as before. Insert the needle through a few stitches. Bring it out between fabric layers about 2 centimeters away and trim. And with that, your first buttonhole is done. Now let's move on to the keyhole buttonhole using number 50 thread. This type of buttonhole requires more practice as it has a rounded end where the buttonhole stitch curves outward. First we need to make a small round hole at the end of the rectangle using a punch plier. I'm using the smallest setting here to keep it neat and precise. After punching the hole, use fabric scissors to cut an opening along the rectangle as we did before. Now we need to do the forepass again. Start the pre-stitching by inserting the needle between the fabric layers about 2 cm away from the left corner. I always begin in the left corner, moving up lengthwise with the thread. Then inserting the needle back between the layers in the upper right corner. This anchors the thread around the buttonhole's edges without piercing both fabric layers. The pre-stitching is complete and now we can move on with the buttonhole stitch. As a quick reminder on how to make the buttonhole stitch, insert the needle through the buttonhole opening, come out close to the last stitch, pull the thread until a loop forms. Then pass the needle behind the loop, either left or right, and through its opening to complete the stitch. Pull gently to set the stitch in place, making sure to keep the tension even. And remember, it's important to choose if you go left or right behind the loop and continue with the one direction you chose. Just one more time to show you. Place the needle next to the last stitch you made. Pull until a loop forms and make sure it's not twisted. That's also important. Then I'm going behind the loop and I'm choosing to go left. I'm not going right. It would change the way the buttonhole looks if you keep changing the buttonhole stitch direction. So I'm always making sure to go left, and that's how I continue stitching. One important thing, you need to stop just before you reach the punched hole, because now we'll change the direction of the stitch tension. Instead of pulling toward the buttonhole's opening, start pulling the thread slightly upward. When you reach the rounded edge, pull the stitches outward to form a neat curve around the hole. That's one way to create the keyhole look. Of course, you can keep pulling towards the opening of the buttonhole. This will be a different style, but I wanted to show you this one because I think it can look really nice and clean if you do it this way. It's the one buttonhole you need the most practice to achieve this look, but I think it's worth giving it a try. To help maintain the curve, you can lightly mark the stitch line around the hole. Please use something that is removable, not like me. Begin stitching along this rounded line, ensuring each buttonhole stitch is pulled outward. Keep turning the fabric as you stitch to remain a smooth curve. As you reach the end of the rounded area, start pulling the stitches toward the inside of the buttonhole again. Continue the buttonhole stitch along the straight edge until you reach the corner. Make sure to pull it towards the inside of the buttonhole the whole time. And once we reached the corner, reinforce the corner by stitching back and forth 3 to 4 times as we did with the square buttonhole. For the keyhole style, you can add an optional middle stitch in the reinforced area to further strengthen it. Once finished, secure the remaining thread by weaving it through a few stitches on the buttonhole's backside. Then insert the needle between the fabric layers, pull it through about 2 cm away and trim the thread to hide it neatly between the layers. And that's how the keyhole buttonhole is done. Now I'm showing you the other version for a keyhole buttonhole, or mostly called rounded buttonhole. For this rounded buttonhole, I'm using silk thread in number 40, which I'll double thread in the needle. We begin by punching a small hole with the punch plier at the rounded end of the buttonhole rectangle. After that, cut along the rectangle to open up the buttonhole with fabric scissors. If you haven't worked with silk thread before, it's fine and slightly shiny, ideal for delicate or formal fabrics. To double thread, take a length of silk thread, fold it in half to create a loop, and insert both ends into the needle. Now we have a looped double thread to work with, giving a slightly thicker appearance. As before, we start by anchoring with a pre-stitching. Insert the needle between the fabric layers about 2 cm from the left corner and outline the buttonhole's shape like we did before. And as you might notice, double threading is a bit tricky to work with, but double threading can create a more pronounced look. Generally, silk thread is best used single threaded, especially on fine fabrics, but for this time I'll demonstrate double threading to show the visual difference. Now we can start with the buttonhole stitch, and sorry for the blurriness, it gets better in a second. Insert the needle through the buttonhole opening, coming out close to the last stitch. Pull the thread until a loop forms, then pass the needle behind the loop and through its opening to complete the stitch. With the double threaded needle, make sure to adjust the thread in the needle. If you're pulling one thread more than the other, make sure that it's even. Pull gently to set the stitch in place, making sure to keep the tension even. And once again, I'm inserting the needle next to the last stitch we made. Then I pull until a loop forms, go behind the loop and insert the needle through the loop and pull. And a third time, insert the needle next to the last stitch we made, then pull until a loop forms. Put the needle through the loop going behind the loop and pull. Unlike the previous keyhole buttonhole, this time we'll keep pulling the stitches toward the buttonhole opening, also around the rounded edge. This creates a more uniform look and is a bit easier than pulling outward like we did before. As you reach the punched hole, you can mark the rounded edge with a pen, but make sure to use one that is removable. And now you can keep stitching along the curve, pulling the thread toward the opening to maintain an even, refined line around the edge. Be mindful to keep consistent tension here, as silk thread can slip easily, so a gentle but steady pull works best. And like before, I keep turning my fabric so I can keep stitching in the same rhythm. Once you've finished the rounded edge, continue along the straight edge, completing the buttonhole stitch as you would with other versions. And once you reach the corner, you can again reinforce the corner by stitching back and forth a few times. Once that is done, you can secure the remaining thread by weaving through the backside stitches. Then hide it between the fabric layers. And that's it for the silk keyhole buttonhole with double threading. This method adds dimension. While it's optional, it can enhance buttonholes on satin or other delicate materials. And that's how you do the different buttonhole styles. But those were the more thicker threads. Of course, you can adapt to the fabric you have. For example, if you're doing a blouse that is made of cotton and a bit thinner, you need to go for a thinner thread too. That means, for example, you can use the number 100 thread, double thread it into your needle, and it will look like this. I will show you this version too in double speed, so you can see the visual appearance and the differences between the other ones I showed you before. And here I am already finishing off this buttonhole. So basically we repeated all the steps we did for the square buttonhole, but we used double thread for it. And maybe you ask yourself why I haven't showed the version with using a single thread for this buttonhole. I can show you the comparison right here. I used a medium weight fabric, so that means using number 100 thread just once is just not thick enough. You cannot create a good looking buttonhole with it, because even if you try to work very neat and place the stitches right next to each other, it's still not enough because the thread is just not thick enough. So that means the buttonhole will not look good. I cannot even recommend to use this version for very thin and sheen fabrics. I would rather recommend to use the number 30 silk thread if you need to work on a very shiny and thin fabric. And here's a little comparison to the other versions I showed you, and also the 120 thread in double version. And here are all my recommendations where to use this kind of buttonholes. You can take a screenshot right now. I hope this video helped. It was a very long and informative video, but I hope it was interesting and I hope you learned something new. If you like sewing and design content, please leave a like and click on subscribe, and we see each other next time. Bye!